Metal door slammed shut behind her. Comic. For a moment, Dr. Lillian Hart simply stood there. She looked at the locked door, then at the enormous German shepherd standing 6 feet away. The dog was staring directly at her. His lips were pulled back. His breathing was heavy. His ears were pinned forward. And the low growl coming from his chest was enough to make the fluorescent lights seem louder. Outside the glass window, 3 hospital employees stood watching. One of them was smiling. Lillian slowly turned toward them. "Open the door." Nobody moved. A male voice came through the intercom. "Let's see how good you really are with animals." Lillian's expression changed. She finally understood. They hadn't accidentally locked her inside. They had done it deliberately. The dog suddenly lunged toward the end of the leash. Lillian stepped backward. The German shepherd barked once. Hard, the sound echoed through the treatment room. Outside, someone laughed. Then the intercom went silent. Lillian looked at the dog. The dog looked back. And then she noticed something nobody outside that room had noticed. The K9 wasn't trying to attack her. He was terrified. If you're watching from somewhere around the world, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to see how far these stories travel. And stay with this story, because what happened inside that locked treatment room changed the way an entire military hospital saw one nurse and one K9. Everyone had already labeled dangerous. Her name was Lillian Hart. She was 33 years old and worked as a trauma nurse at Northbridge Naval Medical Center. Lillian had been there for almost 5 years. She wasn't a military officer. She wasn't a K9 handler. And she had never claimed to be an expert in working dogs. But she had something that often mattered more. She paid attention, especially when something didn't make sense. And for the last several months, one particular military working dog had been making absolutely no sense to anyone. His name was Rook. He was a 7-year-old black and tan German shepherd assigned to a Navy security unit. His handler was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Vale, a 41-year-old Navy veteran who had worked with Rook for nearly 5 years. Rook had a reputation: difficult, unpredictable, extremely protective, and, according to several hospital employees, dangerous. But Lillian wasn't convinced. She had first seen Rook 3 weeks earlier. He had been brought into the veterinary treatment area for a routine examination. The moment he entered the room, he became tense. His handler gave a command. Rook ignored it. The handler tried again. The dog growled. A veterinary technician stepped forward. Rook barked. Everyone stopped. Marcus immediately shortened the leash. "Easy." Rook's eyes moved rapidly around the room. He wasn't looking at the technician. He wasn't looking at the veterinarian. He was looking at the ceiling. Lillian had been standing in the doorway. She noticed. "What is he watching?" Marcus looked at her. "What?" "The ceiling." Marcus glanced upward. "Nothing." Rook continued staring. Lillian watched him for another few seconds. Then a ventilation unit switched on above them. Rook's ears moved. Lillian looked at Marcus. "Did you see that?" He frowned. "See what?" He reacted before the unit came on. Marcus shook his head. "He reacts to everything." Lillian didn't answer. She simply watched the dog. The examination continued. Rook refused to approach the veterinary table. He backed away. Marcus tried a familiar command. Nothing. The veterinarian tried to move closer. Rook growled again. The room became tense. Lillian noticed the dog's breathing, fast, but controlled. His pupils were wide. His weight was shifted backward. And his tail wasn't stiff in the way she'd seen in truly confrontational dogs. He looked cornered, not dominant, cornered. Lillian quietly said, "Can I ask something?" Marcus looked at her. What? Has anyone checked whether something in this room is bothering him? The veterinarian frowned. We've examined him. I mean the environment. Marcus stared at her. He's a military dog. I know. He's trained to work around noise. I know. Then why would a room bother him? Lillian looked toward Rook. Maybe it isn't the noise. Nobody followed up on the suggestion. Instead, the examination was stopped. Rook was taken back to his kennel. The official note simply said, behavioral resistance during examination. Lillian remembered that phrase, because it didn't explain anything. It only described what everyone had already seen. A week later, she saw Rook again. He was standing outside the veterinary wing with Marcus. The dog immediately noticed Lillian. His head turned. Marcus looked down. Rook's posture changed. Not dramatically, just slightly. His shoulders relaxed. His mouth closed. Lillian smiled. Hey, Rook. Marcus looked at her. You've met him before? A few times. He remembers you. Lillian glanced at the dog. Does he? Marcus nodded. He doesn't usually look at strangers like that. Lillian crouched several feet away. She didn't reach toward him. Rook watched her. Then slowly sat. Marcus looked surprised. He never sits when he's this tense. Lillian looked around. What happened? Marcus frowned. Nothing. She looked toward the ceiling. The ventilation system was running. Rook's ears shifted. Lillian pointed upward. Turn that off. Marcus stared at her. What? Just for a minute. The technician hesitated. But eventually the ventilation unit was switched to another setting. Rook relaxed. Lillian looked at Marcus. He looked at the dog, then back at her. You think that's it? I think it's part of it. The discovery should have changed how the hospital treated Rook. Instead, it created an uncomfortable problem. Someone had already decided what kind of dog he was. Dangerous, difficult, uncontrollable. And once people believed that, every growl became proof, every retreat became aggression, every refusal became disobedience. Lillian didn't like that. She said so during a staff meeting. We're labeling the behavior without understanding the trigger. A senior administrator looked at her. Are you suggesting the canine is harmless? No. Then what are you suggesting? That we find out why he's reacting. The administrator sighed. Chief Vale has been handling him for years. I know. Then perhaps we should trust the handler. Lillian nodded. I do. She paused. But I also trust what I'm observing. Nobody answered. The situation became worse 2 days later. Rook was scheduled for another examination. This time, several staff members were already nervous. The veterinarian approached. Rook growled. A technician stepped forward. Rook barked. Marcus pulled him back. Rook! The dog suddenly lunged toward the far corner of the room. Everyone froze. Marcus struggled to redirect him. The room became chaotic. Someone shouted for security. Another person moved toward the door. Rook barked again. Then Marcus yelled, "Everybody out!" The room cleared. Lillian remained in the corridor. She looked through the glass. Rook stood in the center of the room. His breathing was rapid. He kept looking toward the same corner. Lillian stared. There was nothing there. Then she noticed the sound, a faint mechanical hum. She looked up. Another ventilation unit, the same type. Her eyes narrowed. She turned toward Marcus. He isn't trying to attack anyone. Marcus looked exhausted. I know. He's trying to get away from something. Marcus stared through the glass. You really believe that? Yes. He looked at her. Then what do you suggest? Lillian didn't answer, because before she could, a hospital administrator walked into the corridor. His name was Gerald Pierce. He had already heard about the incident. He looked through the glass, then at Lillian. You seem very confident about this dog. Lillian remained silent. Gerald smiled thinly. Maybe you should prove it. Marcus immediately frowned. Gerald, but the administrator continued. You said everyone was misunderstanding him. Lillian looked at him. I said we should investigate. Then investigate. Marcus stepped forward. That's not a good idea. Gerald ignored him. He looked at Lillian. Unless you're not as confident as you sounded in that meeting. Lillian understood the challenge. She also understood something else. They wanted to embarrass her. She looked through the glass at Rook. The dog was trembling slightly. She looked back at Gerald. What exactly are you asking me to do? Gerald smiled. Go in. Marcus shook his head. No. Gerald turned toward him. Chief, you said she's been right about the dog. Marcus's expression hardened. I said she noticed something. Then let her handle it. Lillian looked at Rook. The dog was still staring at the same corner. Then the ventilation system above them switched on. Rook immediately backed away. Lillian's eyes narrowed. She finally understood. They weren't dealing with an uncontrollable dog. They were dealing with a dog whose fear had been mistaken for aggression. She turned toward Gerald. I'll go in. Marcus grabbed her attention. Lillian. She looked at him. Trust me. Marcus hesitated, then quietly said, I do. The door opened. Lillian stepped inside. Rook immediately stiffened. The door closed behind her. Then came the lock. Click. Lillian turned. Outside the glass, Gerald and the others watched. Someone folded his arms. Someone else smiled. Lillian looked at them. Then slowly turned back toward Rook. The German shepherd growled. She didn't move closer. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't try to touch him. Instead, she looked toward the ventilation unit, then toward the floor, then at Rook's paws. The dog was trembling. Lillian lowered herself slowly until she was sitting on the floor. She kept several feet between them. Rook stared at her. His growl continued. Lillian took a slow breath. Okay. She spoke softly. You don't trust this room? Rook's ears moved. She didn't advance. You don't have to trust me either. Outside, Marcus watched through the glass. His expression had become serious, because he knew something the others didn't. Lillian wasn't trying to control Rook. She was giving him a choice. And then, Rook did something that made Marcus step closer to the glass. The dog slowly walked toward Lillian, stopped, and lowered his head. Lillian noticed something attached beneath his collar, a small medical sensor. She looked at it, then at the ceiling. Her expression suddenly changed. That's it. Marcus couldn't hear her through the glass, but he saw her face. Then Lillian looked directly at him and pointed upward. Marcus followed her finger. His eyes widened because he suddenly realized what she had discovered. And outside that locked treatment room, everyone was about to hear exactly what Rook had been trying to tell them. Lillian pointed toward the ceiling again. Marcus stared at the ventilation unit. Then he looked back at Rook. The German shepherd had stopped growling. He was still tense, but his eyes were no longer fixed on Lillian. They were fixed on the ceiling. Marcus stepped closer to the glass. What is she seeing? Gerald Pierce shrugged. I have no idea. Marcus didn't answer, because something about Lillian's expression had changed. She wasn't frightened anymore. She was concentrating. Inside the room, Lillian slowly moved her hand toward the small medical sensor attached beneath Rook's collar. She didn't touch it. She simply looked at it, then at the ventilation unit, then back at Rook. The dog gave a small, uneasy movement. Lillian understood. The sensor wasn't causing the problem. It was picking something up, a faint vibration, a rhythmic mechanical pulse. something Rook could feel through his body, long before a human could notice it. Lillian looked through the glass again. She raised one hand and pointed toward the ceiling. Marcus immediately understood. He turned to the technician. "Shut that unit down." Gerald frowned. "Why?" "Just do it." The technician hesitated. Marcus's voice became firmer. "Now." The ventilation unit powered down. The low mechanical hum disappeared. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Rook's body relaxed. His shoulders lowered. His mouth closed. And the trembling stopped. The corridor went completely silent. Lillian remained seated on the floor. She didn't move toward him. She simply waited. Rook looked at her. Then slowly walked forward, one step, then another. He stopped directly in front of her. Lillian lowered her hand. Rook sniffed it, then gently placed his chin against her palm. Outside the glass, nobody spoke. Gerald's expression had completely changed. Marcus stared at the dog. He had seen Rook calm down before. But never this quickly. Never like this. Dr. Miriam Sloan, the hospital's veterinary behavior specialist, arrived moments later. She looked through the glass. "What happened?" Marcus pointed toward the ventilation unit. "Turned it off." Miriam looked at Rook. "He's calm." Marcus nodded, because Lillian figured out the trigger. Miriam's eyes moved toward the nurse sitting on the floor. "How?" Marcus shook his head. "She noticed his behavior before any of us did." Gerald stepped forward. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." Marcus turned toward him. "What exactly do you mean?" Gerald lowered his voice. "The dog has been unpredictable for weeks." Marcus's expression hardened. "Because nobody bothered to find out what was triggering him." Gerald didn't respond. Miriam looked at the locked door. "Open it." The door unlocked. Lillian stood slowly. Rook remained beside her. Marcus entered first. He crouched. "Rook." The dog looked at him. Marcus gave the familiar hand signal. Rook responded immediately. Then Marcus looked at Lillian. "How did you know?" She shook her head. "I didn't." He frowned. "You were sure." "I was sure he was afraid." She glanced at Rook. "I wasn't sure why." Marcus looked toward the ventilation unit. "Most people saw aggression." Lillian nodded. "I saw avoidance." Marcus was silent. She continued. "When he barked, everyone focused on the sound." She pointed toward Rook. "I watched where he was looking." Miriam walked into the room. She examined Rook again. This time, he allowed her to approach. No growling, no lunging, no retreat. Miriam looked surprised. "He's completely different." Lillian nodded. "Because the trigger is gone." Miriam looked at the ventilation system. Could the vibration really affect him that much? "It could," Lillian said. "Especially if he's sensitive to low-frequency vibration." Miriam considered it. "And the sensor?" Lillian glanced at the device beneath Rook's collar. "That may have made him more aware of the vibration." Miriam nodded. "It could have." There was nothing magical about it. No secret weapon, no mysterious condition. Just a working dog experiencing an environment differently from the humans around him. Marcus sat beside Rook. He ran his hand along the dog's neck. "You've been telling me." Rook looked at him. Marcus's voice became quiet. "I just didn't understand." Lillian watched them. There was something painful in the way Marcus said it. She knew immediately that this wasn't only about one hospital room. It went deeper. Later that evening, Marcus found Lillian outside the veterinary wing. "You were right." She smiled faintly. "About the ventilation?" "About him." She looked at him. Marcus leaned against the wall. "I've been his handler for almost 5 years. I know. I thought I knew every behavior." "You probably do." He shook his head. "Not like this." He looked through the glass at Rook. "When he started becoming aggressive, I thought he was losing discipline. Lillian remained quiet. I increased his training. His expression tightened. I made everything stricter. Lillian understood, and it got worse. Marcus nodded. Every time. Lillian looked toward Rook. He wasn't refusing you. What was he doing? Trying to tell you something was wrong, Marcus swallowed. I should have known. You couldn't know what nobody had identified. He shook his head. That's what handlers tell themselves when they miss something. Lillian looked at him. Then don't miss it twice. Marcus looked at her. She wasn't judging him. That made the words hit harder. The following morning, the veterinary team conducted a controlled environmental assessment. They didn't want to assume the ventilation system was the only factor. Different sections of the treatment area were tested. Different machines were switched on and off. Rook's behavior was recorded. The pattern became clear. Whenever the low-frequency mechanical vibration increased, Rook became tense. When it decreased, he relaxed. The response wasn't immediate every time. But it was consistent enough to matter. Dr. Miriam Sloan documented the findings. This isn't aggression, Marcus nodded. It's environmental stress. Lillian corrected gently. It's fear caused by something he can't understand. Miriam looked at her. That's a better description. The hospital staff who had watched Lillian enter the room the previous day were now gathered around the veterinary area, the same people who had laughed, the same people who had expected her to panic. Nobody was laughing now. One nurse approached her. I owe you an apology. Lillian smiled. You don't have to. I thought you were just trying to prove everyone wrong. Lillian shook her head. I was trying to understand the dog. The nurse looked toward Rook. I think we all forgot to do that. Gerald Pierce arrived later that morning. He stood near the doorway. For once, he didn't have anything clever to say. He looked at Rook, then at Lillian, then at Marcus. Is the dog safe? Marcus answered. Yes. Are you sure? Marcus nodded. He's been safe the entire time. Gerald's face tightened. Lillian could see the realization beginning to settle in. The incident hadn't proved that Rook was dangerous. It had proved that the hospital had misunderstood him. Gerald finally looked at Lillian. About yesterday. She waited. I shouldn't have locked that door. Marcus looked toward him, Gerald continued. It was inappropriate. Lillian nodded. Yes. There was no satisfaction in her expression. No triumph, just exhaustion. Don't do it to anyone else. Gerald lowered his eyes. I won't. The story might have ended there, but Marcus wasn't finished. He had one more question. He approached Lillian privately. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why weren't you afraid? Lillian smiled. I was. Marcus looked surprised. You were? Of course. She glanced at Rook. He's a large, powerful dog. He was frightened and cornered. That can be dangerous. Marcus nodded. So why did you stay? Lillian thought for a moment. Because being afraid doesn't mean you have to panic. She paused. And because I could see he was asking for space. Marcus looked toward Rook. How? Lillian explained. His weight was shifted backward. His breathing was fast. He wasn't advancing toward me. He was trying to create distance. She looked at Marcus. That told me what I needed to know. Marcus nodded slowly. You read him? No. She smiled. I watched him. That sentence stayed with Marcus. Because it was so simple. I watched him, no special title. No dramatic expertise. Just attention. A week later, Rook returned to the treatment room. This time, the ventilation system was running normally, but before entering, Marcus stopped. He looked at Lillian. You want to come? She smiled. Sure. They entered together. Rook walked in. He looked around, his ears moved. He felt the floor. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus gave him the familiar cue. Rook relaxed. He walked toward the examination table. Then stopped beside Lillian. She crouched. Rook gently pressed his head against her shoulder. Marcus smiled. "Looks like you've been forgiven." Lillian laughed. "I don't think he was ever angry with me." Marcus looked at the dog. "No." He nodded. "He wasn't." The veterinary examination went smoothly. For the first time in weeks, Rook allowed the entire team to work around him without resistance. The same dog everyone had called Uncontrollable stood quietly while his examination was completed. When it was over, Marcus removed the leash from the table. Rook remained beside him. Then Lillian heard something. A faint metallic sound. She looked toward the hallway. Rook's ears moved. His head turned. Marcus noticed.
"What is it?"
Lillian didn't answer. Rook walked toward the doorway, stopped, then looked back at Marcus. Marcus gave him the attention cue. Rook waited. Lillian frowned. Something changed. Marcus followed her gaze. The hallway was empty, but Rook continued watching. Then a faint vibration traveled through the floor. Not from the ventilation system, something else. Something moving somewhere beneath the hospital. Rook turned toward the service corridor. Marcus looked at Lillian. "Again?" She nodded. "Again." They followed him. Not because they assumed he was right. Because they had learned to investigate before judging. Rook led them toward the same lower service area. But this time, the maintenance equipment was operating normally. Nothing seemed unusual. Then Rook stopped beside a wall. He placed his paw against the floor, waited, then looked directly at Lillian. She crouched. "What are you trying to tell us?" Rook remained still. Marcus watched. Then his expression changed. He remembered something. "Wait." He pulled out his phone. He checked the hospital's maintenance schedule. His eyes widened. "What?" Lillian asked. Marcus looked at her. "There's construction scheduled underneath this wing tonight." Lillian frowned. "What kind?" He scrolled. "Concrete drilling." She looked at Rook, then at Marcus. "That could be a problem." Marcus nodded. "Especially if they start without warning." The maintenance supervisor was contacted. The construction crew had planned to begin later that evening. But nobody had considered the effect of the vibration on a highly sensitive, working dog. The hospital changed the schedule. Rook was moved temporarily to a quieter area, and the staff finally understood the lesson they'd missed the first time. Rook hadn't been unpredictable. He had been predictable. They simply hadn't known what he was responding to. That night, Marcus stood beside Rook in the quieter kennel area. Lillian came to check on them. Marcus looked at her. "You know what scares me?" She waited. "I almost believed them." "Who?" "Everyone who called him dangerous." He looked down at Rook. "Because after enough people say something, you start questioning what you know yourself." Lillian nodded. "That's how labels work." Marcus looked at her. "And you? What about me?" "You never called him aggressive." She thought about it. "I called him scared." Marcus smiled. That difference saved him. Lillian looked at Rook. "No." She shook her head. "Listening saved him." If this story is reminding you that animals often communicate long before we understand what they're trying to say, subscribe to the channel. And if you've ever had a dog behave strangely because they sensed something you couldn't see or understand, share that experience in the comments. You might be surprised how many people have a similar story. Marcus looked at Lillian. "I've been his handler for 5 years." She nodded. "And yesterday, I learned something from a nurse." Lillian smiled. "What?" Marcus looked down at Rook. "Never confuse a behavior you don't understand with a behavior you can't trust." Lillian smiled. "That's a good lesson." Marcus nodded. But I think Rook taught it first. Rook lifted his head. Marcus gently touched his harness. 2 fingers, 1 familiar signal. Rook leaned against him. And for the first time since arriving at the hospital, the German shepherd looked completely at peace. But neither Marcus nor Lillian knew that the strangest part of the story hadn't happened yet, because the following morning, Rook would walk into the hospital by himself, stop in front of one particular room, and refuse to move. And this time, there wouldn't be a machine behind the wall. There would be a person inside. The next morning, Rook entered the hospital beside Marcus Vale. Nothing seemed unusual. The lobby was busy. Patients waited near the registration desks. Nurses pushed carts through the corridor. A physician hurried past with a tablet in his hand. Rook walked calmly beside Marcus. Then, without warning, he stopped. Marcus stopped too. Rook was staring toward the emergency wing. His ears moved, his head tilted slightly. Then he walked forward. Marcus followed. Easy. Rook didn't pull. He simply kept moving. They passed the veterinary corridor, past the nurse's station. Then Rook stopped outside a patient room. Marcus looked through the glass. An elderly man was lying quietly in bed. A nurse sat beside him, reviewing his chart. Nothing looked wrong. Marcus looked down at Rook. "What is it?" Rook remained focused on the room. His body wasn't tense. There was no growling, no barking, no pulling. Just complete attention. Lillian happened to be walking toward them. She immediately noticed. "What's he doing?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't know." Lillian approached slowly. She looked through the glass. The patient appeared to be sleeping. She looked at Rook, then back at the patient. "Has anyone checked him recently?" The nurse inside looked up. "About 10 minutes ago." Lillian frowned. "Could you check again?" The nurse hesitated. "He was stable," Marcus quietly said. "Please." The nurse walked to the bed. She checked the patient's monitor, then his breathing. Her expression changed. "His oxygen level is dropping." Lillian immediately entered. The medical team was called. The patient was repositioned. Oxygen support was adjusted. Within minutes, his condition stabilized. The physician looked at the monitor. Then at Rook, standing outside the room. "How did that dog know?" Marcus looked at Lillian. Lillian looked at Rook. "He didn't know." She smiled faintly. He noticed. That distinction mattered. Rook hadn't diagnosed the patient. He hadn't understood the medical numbers. He had simply detected a change. Maybe it was the patient's breathing. Maybe the subtle movement of the bed. Maybe a vibration from the medical equipment. Maybe something nobody had yet identified, but he had noticed. And this time, Marcus hadn't dismissed it. He had listened. Later that morning, Dr. Miriam Sloan reviewed the incident. "We can't say Rook detected the oxygen change directly." Marcus nodded. "I know. We shouldn't turn this into some extraordinary medical claim." "I agree," Lillian smiled. "That's important." Dr. Sloan looked at her. "But we can say that his behavior prompted an earlier assessment. And that assessment caught the change." Dr. Sloan nodded. "Exactly. There was something satisfying about the simplicity of it. No miracle, no supernatural ability. Just a trained working dog noticing something unusual, and a handler who had finally learned not to ignore him. Word spread through the hospital. Not that Rook could somehow diagnose patients. That would have been irresponsible. Instead, people began talking about the nurse who had refused to accept that an aggressive dog was simply aggressive. The same nurse who had been locked inside a treatment room with him. The same nurse who had sat on the floor instead of fighting him. The same nurse who had noticed the vibration. Everyone else ignored. Some people apologized. Others simply became quieter around her. Gerald Pierce eventually found Lillian near the veterinary wing. He stopped several feet away. I heard what happened. Lillian looked at him. The patient? He nodded. He's stable. I'm glad. Gerald hesitated, then said, I owe you an apology. Lillian waited. I shouldn't have locked you in that room. No. I thought you were trying to prove everyone wrong. I wasn't. I know that now. He looked toward Rook, and I was wrong about him. Lillian smiled. You weren't the only one. Gerald looked at her. What do you mean? We all were. Gerald nodded slowly. Then he walked away. Lillian watched him go. Marcus stood beside her. You handled that better than I would have. She laughed softly. That's because you would have given him a speech. Marcus smiled. Probably. Rook looked between them. Lillian crouched. Don't worry. We're not talking about you. Rook gently nudged her hand. Marcus smiled. He definitely thinks we're talking about him. That afternoon, Marcus and Lillian returned to the treatment room. The same room where the door had been locked. The same room where Rook had growled. The same room where everyone had expected Lillian to fail. The ventilation system was running, but it had been properly serviced. The frequency was stable. The room was quiet. Marcus opened the door. Rook walked inside. He looked around. Then he walked directly to the center, stopped, sat. Lillian looked at Marcus. Marcus smiled. Different dog. She shook her head. Same dog. He looked at her. You're right. Lillian glanced at Rook. Only the environment changed. Marcus nodded. And the way we understand him. Marcus removed Rook's leash. The dog remained beside him. Then Marcus gave a familiar tactile cue. Rook turned. Another cue. Rook followed. Lillian watched. Do you remember what you told me the first day? Marcus asked. What? You said we shouldn't train the dog we wish we had. Lillian smiled. Did I? No. He laughed. That was me. Lillian laughed too. You're stealing my lessons. I'm learning. Marcus became quiet, then he said, I want you to know something. Lillian waited. When they called him uncontrollable, he looked down at Rook. I believed them for a moment. She nodded. That happens, but you didn't. No. Why? Lillian looked at Rook. Because he never looked uncontrollable to me. What did he look like? She thought for a moment. Like someone who was asking everyone to stop. Marcus looked down. Rook was sitting calmly beside him and nobody was listening. Lillian nodded. Until you did. A few months later, Rook's reputation had completely changed. He was still powerful, still protective, still capable of becoming dangerous if genuinely threatened. Nobody pretended otherwise. That was important. Respecting a working dog's boundaries didn't mean pretending he couldn't cause harm. It meant understanding what triggered his behavior and managing him responsibly. His treatment visits became calmer. His veterinary examinations became easier. And the hospital developed a simple environmental checklist for working dogs entering sensitive treatment areas. Check ventilation. Check unfamiliar machinery. Minimize unnecessary vibration. Give the handler room. Allow the dog time to observe. Don't crowd him. And above all, don't label behavior before understanding it. One evening, Marcus brought Rook to the hospital for the final follow-up. Lillian met them near the entrance. Rook immediately recognized her. His tail moved. Lillian smiled. Hey, trouble. Marcus laughed. Don't encourage him. Rook walked toward her. She crouched. He placed his head against her shoulder. Lillian closed her eyes for a moment, then gently stroked his fur. You were never trouble, were you? Rook remained still. Marcus watched them. Then he said quietly, He saved me once. Lillian looked up. When? During training. He paused. I was injured. Rook had stayed beside him until help arrived. Marcus had always thought of that as his responsibility as a handler. But now he saw it differently. That's when I should have learned. Lillian smiled. Learned what? That he doesn't need me to speak for him. He looked at Rook. He needs me to listen. Lillian's eyes became emotional. She looked at Marcus. That's probably the best thing you could have learned. Marcus nodded. Then he crouched beside Rook. 2 gentle taps. Rook looked directly at him. Marcus smiled. Ready? Rook stood. They began walking toward the exit. Lillian watched them. Then Marcus stopped. He turned. Thank you. Lillian smiled. For what? For staying in that room. She looked at Rook. I wasn't going to leave him alone. Marcus nodded. I know. If you've been following Rook's story, and this reminded you of a moment when your dog seemed to understand something you couldn't explain, subscribe to the channel and share your own story with us in the comments. We'd genuinely love to hear about the moments when your dog surprised you. That night, Marcus took Rook home. The dog walked into the living room and settled beside his chair. Marcus sat down. For a while, neither moved. Then Marcus reached down. 2 gentle taps against Rook's harness. Rook looked up. Marcus smiled. No words. Rook rested his head against his knee. Still works. The room was quiet, no hospital alarms, no machinery, no people watching. Just a handler and his dog. And Marcus finally understood something he'd spent years missing. He had always believed the bond between them was built on commands, obedience, training, discipline. But those things were only part of it. The real bond had been built through attention, through trust, through learning each other's smallest signals. Rook didn't need to hear Marcus say his name. He knew him. He knew his footsteps, his breathing, his posture, the touch of his hand, the rhythm of his movements. And Marcus knew Rook too. The slight change in his ears, the shift of his weight, the direction of his gaze, the difference between fear and warning, between uncertainty and focus, between asking for space and asking for help. The story of the locked treatment room eventually became something people at the hospital talked about. But not because a nurse had somehow defeated an aggressive canine. That wasn't what happened. The truth was much more meaningful. A frightened working dog had been misunderstood. A nurse had noticed. A handler had listened. And an entire hospital had learned that sometimes the behavior we fear most is actually a message we haven't learned to understand yet. Rook was never magically transformed. He didn't suddenly become gentle with everyone. He remained a trained military working dog. He still needed boundaries. He still needed his handler. And he still had moments when the world became too overwhelming. But now, people knew what those moments meant. And that changed everything. Lillian would sometimes walk past the treatment room where it had all started. She'd remember the sound of the lock, the growl, the people watching through the glass. She'd remember sitting on the floor while everyone outside expected the worst. And she'd remember the moment Rook lowered his head into her hand. That was the moment she knew. He wasn't asking her to control him. He was asking her to understand him. And perhaps that's why the story stayed with everyone. Because it wasn't really about a dangerous dog. It wasn't even about a nurse proving everyone wrong. It was about what happens when we stop asking. How do we make him behave? And start asking, what is he trying to tell us? Years later, Marcus would still keep a photograph from that hospital visit. It showed Rook sitting calmly beside Lillian in the treatment room. No dramatic pose, no heroic moment. Just a tired nurse sitting on the floor beside a military canine who had finally stopped being afraid. On the back of the photograph, Marcus had written, "They call Him, uncontrollable. She took the time to listen, and beneath it, sometimes the quietest answer is the one that changes everything. Because Rook never needed to become a different dog. The hospital needed to become better at understanding the dog they already had, and the nurse who had been locked inside that room. As a humiliation, left it having taught everyone something they would never forget. Fear can look like aggression. Silence can look like nothing. And sometimes, the animal everyone wants to control is simply the one nobody has taken the time to understand.